Mark Twain, he wasn't just an amazing novelist, but he was so much more. He was a humorist, he was a journalist, a lecturer, he was a philosopher, he was a stand-up comedian. There is so much to say about him, so let's talk about him together. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to Maiora. Today we're going to talk about American literature, and specifically we're going to talk about Mark Twain. I got a lot of requests, and that's right, I mean, he was a pillar of the American literature, and that's why you will get not just one video but two videos, and I'll tell you why. So he was such a complex person, and he had such a complex personality. He wrote a lot, but he wrote different things. He had strong ideologies, and his experiences were so different, and they influenced his work so much. So it's impossible to talk about him in just one video. So today we're going to talk about his life, his biography, the kind of person he was, and how that person influenced what he wrote, so how the two things are actually intertwined. And in the following video we're going to talk specifically about his works, his ideals, his ideologies, his interests, what other people, other intellectuals said about him, and so much more. Okay, so subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, and click on the bell so you're always updated about our contents, and let's go. Let's talk about Mark Twain, and we start by saying that Mark Twain wasn't actually Mark Twain. That was a pen name. Did you know that? His true name was actual Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Samuel Langhorne Clemens. And he actually kept his true name for a long period of his life, also when he wrote, actually, especially as a journalist. Then he decided to use the pen name for a specific reason, in a specific moment, and he picked that name also for specific reasons, but we're going to see that together. Let's start from the beginning. So he was born in 1835 in Missouri, in Florida, in Missouri. Florida was the name of the city, but it was in Missouri. And he died in 1910 in Connecticut, where he actually spent a long part of his life. As I said before in the intro, well, certainly we all know him as a novelist. We have all read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, but he was so much more. He was a humorist. He was so famous as a humorist. He was a stand-up comedian. He was very popular for that. He was a journalist. He started as a journalist, as a reporter. He was a lecturer, and he was a moralist too. He was a philosopher, especially as far as political philosophy was concerned, and so he was very famous for his travel narratives too. An example is The Innocents Abroad, for example, or Life on the Mississippi. We'll see how important this river was to him, and we're gonna see also the reason why it was so important. Then of course there are adventure stories, especially adventure stories of boyhood. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He was definitely a very gifted storyteller, but he was also a distinctive humorist. And some people say he was a very irascible moralist, actually. But however, he was so popular, and he is one of the most beloved authors and writers in the American history. Well, as a kid, he was often ill. His health was quite weak. He was born premature, and yeah, he was often sick, and that caused his mother to be very indulgent and to forgive his mischievous and sometimes a bit nasty behaviors. And something that's quite funny is that the mother used some particular remedies in order to make him feel better, and we find a lot of these remedies in the adventures of Tom Sawyer. A lot of things he talked about in his stories are actually elements of his own life, so they're kind of autobiographical elements. His mother was a very ironic person, as well as Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, was. It was a Calvinist family, and his father was definitely very, very serious, but it is also true that he had to face a very difficult financial situation, debts and so much more. They had to move. He became justice of the peace, and he had a very visionary perspective of life in general, and business in specific. And probably this is seen as one of the reasons why Clemens, or Mark Twain, had a very romantic memory of his childhood near the Mississippi River, where he spent his youth, in a city called Hannibal. There, near the river, there were a lot of people arriving, there were a lot of people passing by, all kinds of people, rich people, poor people, tradesmen, or gamblers, middle-class people, or very, very poor people. So he had the opportunity and the chance to observe them, and that stimulated his fantasy, and he started creating stories and imagining the backgrounds of these people. And he also reenacted the stories together with his friends. They imagined to be pirates, or maybe some heroes like, you know, Robin Hood. Well, that was very European, by the way. And there was one of his friends, his name was Tom Blankenship. He was the guy that actually inspired the character of Huckleberry Finn. He was a very nice and kind-hearted guy, impoverished by the social condition at the time, and he was definitely the model for Huckleberry Finn. But not only people, also the places he explored were the places he actually talked about in his novels. As I said before, real life inspired a lot of places, people he talked about in his novels, in his fiction in general. And so there were a lot of places in the Mississippi River, or along the Mississippi River, that were actually changed a bit, and then they were actually part of the adventures of Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, like the cave, for example. So his childhood was very interesting on one side, but it was also quite rough on the other side. Despite his, as we said, his romanticized memories, his childhood was also, and his youth were actually quite rough, quite difficult. So we can start talking about the measles epidemic. He lost two siblings because of that, and he got ill too. And then there was cholera, and his father died from pneumonia. And that left the family in an even worse financial situation, with even more debts, and that caused them to sell their only slave, Jenny. And by the way, at the time, slavery was still an institution that was considered accepted by God, but Mark Twain, or Clemens, however you want to call him, was definitely against slavery. Okay, he was an abolitionist, and he's going to talk about that a lot in his works, in his essays, and even through his own characters. We're going to see that. Then another difficult part of his youth was the fact that he had to face social disorders, riots. He found a corpse in his father's office. He saw one of his friends drowning in the Mississippi River. He found in the river again, he found a mutilated corpse of a fugitive slave. I mean, all these experiences were very rough, very strong, very dark for a child, for a kid, or for anyone actually. In the meantime, he started quite a few odd jobs, and he also became a journalist. In 1850, he started publishing a newspaper, and the following year, in 1851, that became the Hannibal Journal, so the journal of the place he lived in, Hannibal. Then he became an itinerant laborer, and at the age of 37, he actually started to describe himself as a literary person. A literary person, not a literary persona, because he will start talking about a literary persona when he starts using the pen name, the pseudonym Mark Twain. For the moment, he considers himself a literary person. And he keeps working as a journalist, as a reporter and a typewriter in St. Louis, in New York, in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. He read a lot, he learned a lot. And he was very ambitious. He had a lot of initiative. In fact, he decided to take a steamboat for New Orleans, and it was directed to South America. And there he persuaded the captain to take him as an apprentice, and he learned a lot. He learned about Mississippi, about the river, about how to become a pilot actually, and he also wrote about that in the work Old Times on the Mississippi. He kind of experimented meritocracy that was probably the beginning of what we're going to call the American dream. And this is what he talks about, for example, in his work A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. He talks about meritocracy, he talks about society, and how to find your own place within society. He also fell in love during this period, and then there was the war, the Civil War. He left this life, and actually he didn't join the Confederation, the army. His ideas about the war and politics in the specific moment of his life are a bit obscure. Are not very clear, but we know that he covered actually the legislative session in Carson City, and that's when he wrote 3 letters for the Enterprise. And for the very first time he decided to use this pen name Mark Twain. So Samuel Clemens became Mark Twain here. Not forever, because he has used many other pen names and pseudonyms throughout his life, and he has also written many works anonymously. So there are a variety of identities. It's not even very easy to find the correct and precise number of works he wrote, because some of them are anonymous and some others, I mean, may use another name. So it's not very easy to keep track of everything he wrote. Anyway, here he starts using this pen name, Mark Twain. And here he says, because then he talked about this decision, and he said that it took time for him to become a credible literary persona. Not a person anymore, but a literary persona with this pen name, Mark Twain. Why this choice? Why Mark Twain? I mean, there are different theories. One of them is that probably there was a mistranscripted telegram that made him believe that a pilot of a boat was dead, and his name was free to be taken over. That's a possibility, but let's say that the most probably the most probable theory is that he actually took this expression, took this name from a slang phrase, a slang expression that was used by sailors on the river, and that expression was by the mark Twain, and Twain was spelled with the final E, so differently from his name. But anyway, it was used to mark, to somehow to spot a sort of a safety depth. Okay, when they were traveling, or they were on the boat. And so the idea of safety when you are traveling, safety when you're sailing, that's kind of a good metaphor, and probably the metaphor that induced him to use this expression, this slang expression, as his name. Anyway, he kept working as a correspondent, as a journalist, as a reporter. He worked for the San Francisco Morning Call and for the Golden Era and the Californian. And he also wrote about quite controversial topics, like, for example, he wrote about his indignation for the corruption of police in San Francisco. And that's why I say that his jobs were a bit odd and very different from one another, because he changed completely from being a sailor and a pilot on a boat to mining. Yes, he did some mining, and during this period he wrote a book of humorous sketches, and one of these stories became very, very famous, and it was Jim Smiley and his jumping frog. And that story became so famous that probably it was the first work that was considered popular after he changed his name. So he was the first work that Mark Twain wrote, and the first popular work that was considered absolutely popular. Yeah, let's say that here he started his literary career, not a career as a journalist, but a career in literature. He also got married. He married Olivia Langton, and her father gave him some financial assistance that was definitely useful in order to start his career and to go on with his literary career. Unfortunately, his son died from diphtheria not long after, but he kept working. Working was a reaction, a way, let's say a coping mechanism that he used every time he suffered from a loss. And unfortunately, he had quite a few losses in his life. There was here the first attempt at a novel, a proper novel, that was The Gilded Age. And in the meantime, he also wrote quite a few other stories or short story about the Mississippi. But especially in this period, and especially in 1876, he wrote The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, so well known. This novel was about the mischievous adventures of this boy that grows up, let's say, along the Mississippi River. A lot of elements are autobiographical, but let's say that it is a sort of a hymn to childhood, to youth in general. He doesn't only talk about youth, he doesn't only talk about boyhood or childhood, but he talks, especially talks from the perspective, from the point of view of that guy, and that's extremely new. It's not just from the point of view of an adult, but it's from a point of view of a child, of a kid, let's say so. And of course, in the book, he talks about adventures and pranks and sort of a quite comic courtship of Becky Thatcher, and then this thrilling escape from the cave that was, as I said before, the place was inspired by a real place in the Mississippi River. That was definitely great for kids, but it wasn't just for kids, it was for everyone, and it was certainly quite new in this genre. One of the characters in the book, in the novel, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, was Huckleberry Finn. And Huck was so popular, and he was such a strong character that somehow he needed his own story, he needed his own fiction, his own novel, and he needed his own let's say, vernacular voice, and that's why Mark Twain wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn 9 years later, so in 1885. Then something happened in Mark Twain's or in Clement's life. In fact, he held a speech and that was so unpleasant. He found that speech humiliating. He was accused of talking about some of the pillars of the American literature and culture in a negative way, and so he found the experience so humiliating that he decided to move to Europe. And during this period in Europe, he also wrote a very popular work, which is A Tramp Abroad. And he had the chance to get to know the Black Forest, he loved Switzerland, and in this period he wrote a story that is so popular today, and it is The Prince and the Pauper. And he talked about the story, and he defined the story as a narrative for young people of all ages. And that's a great definition, because it's definitely for young people, as Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, but actually the moral message and the whole story, the metaphors, the tropes are absolutely interesting for readers of all ages. Then he grew a bit older, and he started publishing some novels anonymously, as I said before. And the reason was that he actually hoped that he could have more credibility by publishing this novels, his works, anonymously, rather than using his pen name Mark Twain, because he believed that this name wasn't believable at the time, was somehow, I don't know, it was in disgrace, and so he published anonymously, and he also wanted some works to be published posthumously, so after his death, because he considered them scandalous, and he was sure that his society couldn't actually accept them in a way. And after that, he had to face another huge loss. His daughter Susie died of spinal meningitis, and after that he worked even more. As I said before, it was kind of a coping mechanism for him. And he worked to redeem, let's say so, to redeem Mark Twain's reputation. So the reputation of this persona, okay, this literary persona that was Mark Twain, apart from Samuel Clemens. And he managed. He did it. His name, Mark Twain, was actually studied at universities. So he managed to enter the academic world in a way. He also wrote an autobiography, and a few speeches. In a speech, he talked about an old man that tried to convert a young man to a branch of philosophical determinism, and that's something he quite believed in at the time. He also wrote a few essays, quite polemical essays. As I said before, he was very vocal about what he believed in, his ideas, and he wasn't a man of many compromises. He talked quite clearly about what he believed in or what he was against. In fact, he wrote against anti-Semitism. He wrote against imperialism, especially American imperialism. He wrote against the exploitation of Africa. And he wrote against lynching. Lynching was quite a widespread habit in America at the time, and he wrote against that. Let's say that he was quite against, not completely, not 100%, but quite against death penalty too. Okay, but especially here he talked about lynching, against lynching. His last years are considered his bad mood years, but he spent some time in Italy, and I mean, he felt a little bit better, and he wrote chronicles. It's quite, I mean, these chronicles are a quite tenderly comic way to describe the relationship between Adam and Eve. And then he wrote some poems for his deceased daughter Susie, and also for his wife who died at the time, and supposedly he wrote those poems while sitting next to her while she was dying, so sitting on her deathbed. That was a very sad period of his life, and these losses actually had a strong impact on him, on his life in general, and he found some relief in being a grandfather. And so he founded a school for girls, and the name of the school was Angelfish Club. At the same time, he kept writing, and he wrote some comic, let's say sardonic letters. Some of them are considered even heretical letters. They were never published at the time. The name was Letters from the Earth, and they were definitely anti-religion letters. In fact, he saw God as the real cause of every pain the human race had to endure. So God was to be blamed according to these letters, and Jesus Christ was supposed to have devised hell instead of Satan. So that was a very, very, very heretical perspective at the time, and yeah, those letters were never published at the time. However, in this period, he starts a new friendship that was very deep and very important with Henry H. Rogers. He was one of the Standard Oil executives, and besides being a very important figure in his life, besides that very important friendship, that was also a great, huge help and support from a financial point of view, so it helped a lot. But also Roger died, and he died in the same year when another daughter of Clemens died too. Her name was Jeannie. And same year, another daughter, Claire, got married and she moved away. So that was a very difficult moment for Clemens, for the man, okay, Samuel Clemens in this case. And let's say that he spent the last years of his life quite alone, quite lonely, and in 1910 he died in Connecticut of an heart attack. Yes, he lived alone, but he was still working on his philanthropic causes, and for example, he kept being very active and to support the rights of Afro-American people, Native Americans, or women, and animals too. He was against vivisection, for example, and that's quite, I find it so great. At the time, he wanted to support deaf, blind people. That was quite innovative at the time. So his engagement in social themes and causes was so strong, and I mean, it has been until the very end. Now, there is so much more to say, so much more to tell you about him, but I'm not going to do it now. The video is quite long. I'm going to publish and to upload another video, as I told you before, and we're going to talk about him, about his ideologies, about his interests, about his works, about his style, about what other people, other intellectuals like Hemingway, for example, told about him. That's very interesting. There's so much to say about Mark Twain. You can see that it's not just Tom Sawyer, it's not just adventures for boys. There is so much more, and so I want to get a bit in detail with you and for you. So please follow me, follow us, and subscribe the channel, hit the bell. And just a quick thank you to all of you who decide to support the channel and support my work, which is completely for free for you. But some of you decide to leave me a little something. You just have to hit the button with the heart here below, or just the PayPal button on the home page of the channel, and you can leave me just a little something, and that's a huge support for this activity. And I thank you so very much, because so many of you have decided to do so, and that, I mean, you have no idea of the meaning it has for me, for what I'm doing, my activity, my channel, but also for me personally, because this is something like I don't know, thank you, or I don't know, a sort of a way to tell me that my work is worth somehow. So thank you so very much. Love you all. See you very soon, and as usually, take care.